India needs a growth mindset. That's my first point. So, Joseph Stiglitz, who got the Nobel Prize, made the point, very significant point. A country is not all about GDP and its growth. I want to be respectful of GDP, but not to work on the basis that that's the only goddess we have to pray to. And anyway, India's GDP growth has undergone some changes in the way it is computed, which is very technical for an economist. We are not even sure whether the numbers that we are seeing are comparable to the past or not. And the pundits are discussing it. So I want to make the point that growth is not only about GDP. GDP is a manifestation of growth, but only one. The second point I want to make is growth is not about mathiness, mathematics. Growth is not about what economists do. Multiply, divide, extrapolate, correlate, regress, and arrive at numbers. I call this mathiness. People are very, very mathematically orientated. I respect mathematics as a former student of physics and sciences and engineering. But I also have learned through my business career that there is something called truthiness. So there is mathiness and there is truthiness. All mathiness is not truthiness and all truthiness is not mathiness. And truthiness means you go around looking at what your eyes see, what your ears are hearing, and you say there is something to what I'm hearing and seeing. And sometimes that doesn't match with the mathiness. For example, it is a statistical reality that the government has put out a number that India's GDP growth is going to be 7.6 or 7.4 or whatever number it is. But that's mathiness. The truthiness when I walk around is I can't see it. Now I don't know whether what I'm seeing is 6.4 or 5.4, but I have to confess that I'm a very ardent seeker of anecdotal information, and the truthiness of what I'm seeing is somewhat different from the mathiness of what I'm studying. So growth is not only about mathiness. Then I want to say that growth is a mindset. It is in your head and my head and the head of people like us. And what is this thing about mindset? There was a well-known professor of psychology in Stanford. Her name is Carol Dweck, for those who are academically orientated, and I owe it to her that I'm expounding her ideas. And she said that there are two types of human beings: those with a growth mindset and those with a fixed mindset. Probably more true to say that all of us have one part of ourselves in growth mindset and another part of our brain which is in a fixed mindset. So what is a growth mindset? A person in a growth mindset mode is always wanting to learn new things, wants to try something new, wants success but does not fear failure. If they fail, they learn from it. That's a growth mindset. Entrepreneurs typically are of a growth mindset. The opposite of the growth mindset is the fixed mindset. They have a great desire to succeed, but they just feel they cannot afford to fail. They must get it right. They've got too much reputation invested in their existing state or their past, and so they will not experiment with things for the future. I do not want to say that fixed and growth mindsets are good or bad, except to say that both of them exist in all of us. Having defined what it needs, I really think that as a nation, India needs to adopt and revise into a growth mindset far more strongly than in the past. Because we all know the history of how businesses grew, and we are coming out of that whole regime that we have seen in the past. And if this mindset change is required, and I would like to say 2 or 3 aspects of it in the rest of what I'm going to speak, it's required in government and business. This is the first point I wanted to make, that India needs a change of mindset. In that I'm saying business needs a change of mindset. I'm in the Indore Management Association. I want to share with you as peers in the business field, in the management field, what you and I can do when we go back to our desks tomorrow morning. And I want to say that we must first recognize that we are salesmen. And what do I mean by saying we are salesmen? In our society, a salesman is not always regarded very highly. Trading is not regarded very highly, except in certain communities. When I was joining my first job in Hindustan Lever, and they sent me on training to sell Dalda and Sunlight soap and Lifebuoy soap out here from the Mau depot, not far from here, 48 years ago. My grandmother thought that what is the use of having studied physics and engineering if all that you're going to do in your life is to be a salesman? So that's the sort of position for a salesman. But think about it this way, that every human being, every institution, every company, small, big, medium, tiny, it doesn't matter, is sandwiched between a customer and a vendor, and is surrounded by an ecosystem of a regulatory authority, of consumers, NGOs, community, society, and so on. Nobody is sitting free. Sometimes people say, I quit my job in the bank or the company in order to set up, I wanted to be my own master. Nobody is his own master. Because when you set up your own business, there also you have a vendor, there also you have to sell your goods to a customer, and there are enough people, excise inspectors, sales inspectors, Factories Act, who will come and visit you periodically to remind you that you cannot ignore them. So all of us are sandwiched into a jigsaw, which is comprised of a vendor, a customer, and an ecosystem. And the whole nature of business and management is to have transactions within this, where you have to give vent to an idea, a new idea. Business is about new ideas and implementing new ideas. So while the salesperson is always trying to close, the classical traditional salesperson, close a deal with a revenue, a non-salesperson is all the time trying to sell an idea which requires him to be aware of three things. Is he attuned to the customer? Is he enthusiastic? Is he buoyant? And lastly, has he got a clarity of what he is offering? Why should the customer listen to you? I've just come from Delhi and I went to make there, amongst other things, a presentation on Swachh Bharat. This is not a subject in which I have specialized. I do not propose to get a PhD in that subject. But it is a complex problem. And I won't go into that subject, but I was selling to other people an idea of what can be done about Swachh Bharat. So I was a salesman. For all of that 2 hours I was sitting in the meeting trying to sell an idea. The important thing is I went back saying I can modify my sales pitch. I can modify my ideas. So it's a different type of salesman compared to the past. And I think the day corporate India, irrespective of the designation of the person, recognizes that we are all salesmen, then I think we would have made a great shift in our minds to becoming into a growth mindset. The second observation I want to make is that there is a great startup fever all around. Everybody wants to be a startup. When you read some of the pink papers, you get the feeling that the old industries don't matter anymore. How does it matter what happens to Tata Steel or Tata Motors or Hindalco? It's all startups. And these startups have several attractions. They seem to get valuations in 5 years or 10 years, which the other person took 100 years to get or 50 years to get. So naturally, we all look for some quick money, and startups are very attractive. Young people are very attracted because startups are not bureaucracies. They can use other people's money to spend on other people while keeping some for themselves. That's a startup. Startup doesn't often put his own money. I want, when I think about it, to recall that someday in the past, Tata was also a startup. My old company Unilever is also a startup. And I go back to history and look at what they went through and what are the lessons we can draw. There's a very well-known psychologist called Erik Erikson who has done some very serious work on growth. And he has identified in a human being that there are 8 stages of growth. I won't go into all the 8 stages, but I want to point out that 5 out of those 8 stages are between the age of 0 and 18. And only 3 come between 18 and the person going. Those 5 he has sliced and diced into fine parts because those early years are very, very important, as any parent knows. Companies also go through an Erik Erikson model. Companies can also be sliced and diced for which phase of their life is. Today's startup will be tomorrow's adolescent. Tomorrow's adolescent will be day after tomorrow's grande. And this is the cycle that companies are social institutions. IMA is a social institution of people. And wherever there are people, there will be a life cycle, and the life cycle can be managed. I learnt PBT in my management college. Obviously, it doesn't matter anymore. Only valuation matters. You can be $1 billion company with a negative profit, and you can do this for 20, 30 years. That's not what you are taught in your MBA. So there is something in this paradox which you try to resolve in your head. And I didn't want to get arithmetical or accountant orientated on this. I asked myself, would I go to a maternity home, look at all the little babies in the crib, and say that one will get a Nobel Prize, that one is going to get the Bharat Ratna, that child looks very bright, just by looking at the child's face, his parents, and what his parents do? It is crazy. I would not. Before a company has even started its operation, within 1 or 2 years, they are identified. People put more money behind it. So there's a craze also that's going on. Some of them are sensible, but some of them are crazy, and you don't know the difference between the two. So I went into the past record, available data of what has happened when people have backed very, very young, nascent flowers which have not yet bloomed on the plant. And I found that there is a very well-known scholarship in the United States called the Westinghouse Science Talent Search. It's been going on since 1942. And the data of all the Westinghouse Science Talent scholars up to 1994 has been analyzed and is put into the public domain. So that gave me some bit of mathiness to the statement that I'm making. So when the Westinghouse Science Talent Scholarship came, they wanted to spot young people very early and then give them the facilities, exactly like a startup company. And here is what they found, that of the 200,000 kids who applied for the scholarship, 2,000 were selected. So you've been very, very selective. And these 2,000 kids were considered precocious, which means that they were told, you're God's gift to mankind. Okay, my own niece got a letter signed by President Bill Clinton saying that you are a very talented little child. America looks to you to grow up and do great things. So you make the child conscious that she's very special. You give her scholarships. You make her feel very special. And then they look back at what happened to these 2,000 children. Now that you got data of the last so many years. You know what they found? Only 20 out of the 2,000 who themselves are selected out of 200,000 bright kids, only 20 made it to the National Academy of Sciences. Very small percentage. So the question arose, what happened to the other 2,000 minus 20, 1,880 very smart kids? And they found that these people did not show their full potential because they lacked a growth mindset. They lacked originality. America's brightest children who were selected from the bestest, who got the Westinghouse Scholarship, failed to exhibit originality. And that is a stunning number. The moment you make a person aware that he or she is special, he or she seeks to fade. A person must never be told you're fantastic. This is the lesson that comes out of this. So I dig deeper into the subject and find that an academic called Benjamin Bloom has published a paper. He studied a number of world-class musicians, sportsmen, scientists, people who reached the top end of their profession. And he went into what happened in their early childhood and how did their parents teach those children. And I say this in particular because there are a few ladies here who I presume have the burden of parenthood a little more than their husbands. After all the mumbo jumbo is done, they came to this Gayatri mantra for growth. They called it the growth code. And they uncovered it to have 3 parts to it. And I'm sharing this Gayatri mantra with you. First, growth driving companies, GDCs, have organized themselves to deliver a magnetic customer experience. They have organized themselves to deliver a magnetic customer experience. They are not organized in the old way, manufacturing, sales, marketing. They've rearranged their way they think and work so the customer is at the center of it. It's not a new idea, but it just sharpens the focus on something that we know. Every company knows he exists because there's a customer. Mr. Narendran was hesitant to take flowers from Mr. Chordia because he said he's my customer. I should be giving him flowers. It's good to remember that. Second, these companies were fueled by momentum generating leadership. There was tremendous physical, psychological, intellectual energy driving these companies. You cannot have a laid back leadership in a company which is likely to then drive growth. Some people look as though they are laid back. Like if you look at some of these IT leaders, they look as though they are laid back, but they're highly intense people. And he says his big boss, Larry Ellison, who's worth, I don't know how much he'll tell you, seems to spend 40% of his time on his yacht. But I'm sure he's not sitting in his yacht swatting flies or drinking champagne, but recreating his company, Oracle, to be a powerful company. But he's going to tell you the story, so I will not go into that. So the first one, to repeat, is the company is organized to deliver a magnetic experience for the customer. The second one is they are fueled by momentum driving leadership. The third is they are energized by highly involved employees. Growth driving companies have highly involved employees whose engagement with the company and its business is extremely strong.